And so it's informed how I educate as a fieldwork educator, but also helping me get clear on the starts and stops of starting a business, and that I don't have to rush into things or do things in a way that says I'm going to be a 60-hour-a-week business owner. I can do things on a more project by project basis. It really has flipped on its head to me what it means to work, what it means to work in a way that honors the season of life that you're in and what's happening around you, and to make space and build work in a way that allows for those unexpected moments to come up versus build something that if one thing goes down, it's dominoes.
You're listening to the Brave OT podcast with me, Carlin Meek. This podcast is all about empowering occupational therapists to step up, level up, blaze some trails, and maybe engage in a little conscious rebellion in service of our profession, our clients, our work, our businesses, and living our mission wholeheartedly. We are all about keeping it real, doing hard things, unhustling, being curious, exploring, growing through our challenges, and finding joy, fulfillment, and vitality as we do so. Really, we're OTing ourselves and each other. I hope you love this episode. Hey OTs, do you want to get out of the box? Are you tired of being in the box? Are you an out-of-the-box thinker? We talk about working outside the box all the time as OTs. We tend to naturally be the types of people who challenge the box, question the box, stand on the box, look at the box, turn the box upside down as OTs. It's just a requirement. We are non-boxy people by nature. And many of them start their own businesses, but they bring the box with them. They stick to the 40-hour work week or more. They attach themselves to productivity standards that their employer had for them. They don't give themselves time off. They don't cut themselves slack. They have high expectations for detailed reporting and things like that. So if you've shifted to entrepreneurship, started your business to get out of the box, but you stayed in the box, this might be the episode for you. Talking to Kary Waters, who learned from the concept of unschooling. She shifted toward unschooling her children a couple of years ago and ended up unworking herself. She does consulting. She is working flexibly. She's doing what fits. She's taking opportunities that come up. She's exploring them. She's staying grounded in her own values and her own needs. And she's here to tell us more about how she did that. Stick around and learn a little more. Kary Waters is an occupational therapist and entrepreneur in Minnesota. She has spent most of her life collecting insights from lived experiences in her roles as an addictions counselor, friend, consultant, mother, wife, daughter, educator, and student. All of these roles, in retrospect, began with some variation of, "It was not what I planned." It has guided her new focus in the occupational therapy profession. The learnings from these experiences have led her to her latest endeavors that are focused more on collective occupational needs than individual needs alone. Thank you, Kary, for joining me on the Brave OT podcast. I'm really excited to have you on here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and be part of the conversations you're having.
Are you comfortable sharing a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you're passionate about?
Sure. I'm an occupational therapist. I started my career in addiction counseling, and it was really that path of being in addiction counseling that led me to becoming an OT, because I thought I'd become a clinical psychologist. It was that was my goal, of do that to get experience, become a clinical psychologist. Yeah. I would say 3 years in, it became clear that was too narrow of a focus for what I was seeing was what I wanted to focus on in healthcare and helping people get back to leading lives in recovery. And it took me 7 years to become an OT. But once I learned what OT was, I realized there's a degree for this. I have to go back and do it for one. So, so was my journey to occupational therapy. And in occupational therapy, I've worked in geriatrics, pediatrics, management roles, staff, PRN kind of stuff, just a variety of things, which then ultimately led me to become a consultant. I had some administrative roles before that, and some opportunities arose to do consulting and relationship-based care. And so Loved that work, loved therapeutic relationships is a big focus of mine. And throughout my career, and really had the chance to be with a group of people who put that at the forefront of any culture. So that was part of what I did. And then most recently, the pandemic resulted in some big changes. A lot of people had that, right? Where in 2020, not what I planned was the phrase for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And so I became an accidental unschooler. So by unschooler, what I mean by that is that my children were doing the distance learning thing that probably a lot of kids were doing in the spring of 2020.
Yeah.
They did not love it.
How old were they at that time?
At that time, they were 5 and 7. So one was in pre-K, one was in kindergarten. They were going to different schools at that time. So there was a lot of stuff happening. And I remember prior to the pandemic, I was thinking, this pace is out of control. If this is the next 12 years of my life, who does this? How do they do it? I was so floored by how this happens, right? And so I remember thinking, please, I need this to slow down. I felt like I was on a hamster wheel. And then the pandemic hit. And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm that powerful, but I really hope that was not on me, folks. Kind of like when people say they put their summer clothes away and then it snows or things like that. But yeah, so I ended up becoming an unschooler in that process because I was following the steps of what my children needed to learn. Went from distance learning to decided to homeschool because I needed to have a space in my life where the kids were able to just follow what was actually happening in the world versus everything felt so unpredictable. And I think my husband and I needed that as much as my children. And so we began homeschooling, started with a nature-based kind of curriculum. And ultimately that led us to realizing that it needed to be even more organic than just having this nature-focused curriculum. And it needed to understand place, and it needed to understand the historical context, and it needed to understand what kind of conditions that we have right now, what are they going to grow? I felt like I was now charged with, instead of handing that off to somebody else as educators, I felt like I had accepted that primary role along with my spouse. And now I had to really pay attention to what was the environment I was creating, but also what was the environment I was creating for myself in doing that. So I shifted gears. I decided that I would do the homeschooling thing. And
for those who don't know, could you explain the difference between traditional school, homeschool, and unschooling? And that difference too, that a lot of kids were online learnings in homeschool. And so what would the distinction be for those?
Yeah. So the online learning, I would say in the beginning, everybody was just doing the very best we could with what we had.
Yeah.
And so I would want to make it clear that any of the decisions I made, I'm not saying any are superior to any others. It's just about finding the right conditions for your family. And so distance learning was really online learning. In the beginning, it was less structured. I mean, they had certain targets to make, but I can remember my children despised it. And it'd be 10 o'clock at night and I would still be trying to get them to want to do that work. And I thought, oh boy, if this is what I have to do next year, this is going to be not a pleasant thing. Homeschooling, sometimes I think what people think of as homeschooling is replicating school at home. Homeschooling is not intended to be that. It can be if people choose to make it that way and really go curriculum focused. And it really is this idea of knowing your child, knowing what they need, and figuring out what's the right educational environment for them. For some, that does mean a structured curriculum. For some, it does not.
Yeah.
Unschooling is this idea of not client, you can tell I'm used to using healthcare lingo, is really this idea of student-led learning, child-led learning, that our children, if we watch who they naturally are, their interests, their natural gifts and abilities, they guide us to provide the right experiences and opportunities for them to learn. And they show us how they're wired so that we can help foster that. In reality, I feel like learning how to unschool my children has enhanced my OT skills more than anything that I've done recently, because as an OT, we're never doing or activity or occupation for the sake of it, or because it's, quote, just a fun activity, right? We're doing this because it matters to somebody and it means something to them. And so for me, that unschooling process is that, oh, I can do that. That's what we do in OT. The catch is, though, when it's your own children and you have your own thoughts about what schooling means, how it's done, this is what everyone else is doing, or this is what I think you have to do to learn. Unschooling requires a process that we call deschooling.
Okay.
And deschooling that's probably an unfamiliar term. I know it was for me, is really this idea that it's sometimes in school, we get so used to somebody telling us, this is what to do. This is when you do it. This is how you do it, that kids almost have trouble figuring out, what do I do now? When should I do it? How to think for themselves, or how to even be okay with, maybe I need to go at this in another route. And so deschooling is also a part of that process. And it doesn't come on a calendar timeline. I joke that I can't schedule our homeschooling process by saying we're going to have a deschooling break in this month and this month. It shows up whenever it wants to, because it just happens to be the right conditions at that time, showing that we need to step back and take a break. And deschooling means that you just step back and observe. We go into observation mode. And a real goal at the end of the day is simply to connect. And if I connect, that creates the space to notice what the environment is for them to learn, to notice who they are, and also to notice who they are not, and how I might be contributing to supporting or hindering that learning process.
Wow. There's so much beauty in that, honoring your children for who they are, honoring their needs at that time, being open to exploring what possibilities might be, trying things on for size. And you're saying as well that this has impacted the way you are showing up as an OT. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So about the same time that I started doing this work with unschooling in my children, actually, I think in the beginning, I wasn't unschooling. I was still doing the curriculum-based stuff. But at that same time, I started taking level 2 fieldwork students for my own entrepreneurial business. And so in doing that, I was noticing this parallel pattern of what was happening was the deschooling I was having to do with my children and myself. I was needing to apply that same thing for myself as a business owner and also as a fieldwork educator, and to just notice what was creating this space for students to learn what they needed to learn, and to see how adults too, like I said, the deschooling happens more frequently for me than my children. They would say for kids, they need about a month of deschooling for every year they've been in traditional school.
Wow.
But for me, I would say, is anybody talking about the adult need to deschool? Because it was usually me that was the barrier, not so much them. It was me. And I'd see the same thing happen for students. Not so much that I was the barrier there, but that I would say that students as adults were running into the same issue of noticing how their idea of how learning had to be, or what they were supposed to do. Are they supposed to do something that is pleasing to the fieldwork educator, that I am the person driving that bus? We really had to go through and say, no, this is really more of a partnership kind of experience, and that we are going to figure out together, because the whole point of the work that I do is that you're not a weed. You're just in the wrong environment. And we're constantly working to come back into alignment, that our words and actions match, which in the middle of a pandemic and all sorts of other things is not an easy task. We're still in the middle of a lot of big T trauma happening. And so pushing ourselves through at a time when so much was in flux and unknown and shifting rapidly really didn't work. It never did, I don't think.
No.
But now it really wasn't working, right? And so it's informed how I educate as a fieldwork educator, but also helping me get clear on the starts and stops of starting a business, and that I don't have to rush into things or do things in a way that says I'm going to be a 60-hour-a-week business owner. I can do things on a more project by project basis. It really has flipped on its head to me what it means to work in a way that honors the season of life that you're in and what's happening around you, and to make space and build work in a way that allows for those unexpected moments to come up, versus build something that if one thing goes down, it's dominoes. And I think that I'm part of creating an environment for students to reflect on what would that even look like? What would it look like for you to build a career that allowed you to do the same? That this is not something I'm doing just for me. That's what I hope to see for all of us, OTs and beyond, not just OT professionals, but any of us as we think about how we live and work and play and rest. How are the conditions that we're experiencing right now creating the likelihood for that to happen? And if they're not, what is?
That is very brave. It's like you're just blowing, we OTs often say we're outside of the box thinkers. You've blown the box out of the picture. There's no box. And so I'm hearing that analogy where the unschooling process caused you to really unpackage OT to unpackage your work. You're still practicing as an OT in your models and the way you're seeing things, but it doesn't need to be in a specific container the way a traditional job is, the way you've created flexibility so that it can be more organic with your life. But you're also doing that for the students you take on, the OT students. And that is very brave. Do you think you could have done this 10, 15 years ago?
No. No way.
No.
I would say 10, 15 years ago, I would have thought that was impossible. Who does that? Maybe that it was not responsible. Now I view not doing it as irresponsible for me. I joke that with my children, that seeing what the day is structured like in school, at no fault of the educators. I think they have amazing educators. My children had wonderful teachers.
Yeah.
But I think all of our structures and systems have taken on this. It's never enough. Like we are always striving for more and more. And I think our children are basically crying out for us to say, stop, slow down. When is enough? And so now seeing that I'm not going to be able to give them what they need if I keep that pace up, and they aren't being honored as who they are necessarily in that. Could they do it? Maybe yes. But can they do it and have the skills they need to function well as an adult? I don't know. I don't know if that would be true for my children. And so I would say now I view it as my ethical responsibility for being a parent, but also I would say I saw so many people in the world, whether I was working out with the public or I was working individually with people. So on an individual and a community level, friendship, family, the number of people I saw doubting themselves and not believing in themselves was astounding. And people who were just superb. And I was shocked by how common this was. This wasn't just a onesie twosie. I would say this was about 90% of people that I was interacting with.
Yeah.
And that really is what made me feel like, Kary, if you're not going to say it, not everybody has the same experiences and lens. Who is? And I would guarantee that other people are feeling the same way. And yeah, I feel like I would say that I had some changes that felt like I was all of a sudden not on the bus to where I was planning. And yet being off the bus allowed me to say, do I even want to get back on that? Is that a way that I want to live? Does it create any of the things I thought it did? And so I'm very careful about what I'm packing with me for the next legs of the journey. And sometimes I pick them up again. I will say that I joke to feel like I'm sometimes picking those things back up and then say, wait a minute, why did you pick this up? You very intentionally left that down, put it back down.
Yeah.
And so now it just feels like I think, I don't know if you've read the book, The Mindful Family Guidebook, but
No.
It's a wonderful book by an author who is from the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe. And she also is a clinical psychologist out in California. And I'll have to send her her name. But
yeah, I'll put it in the comments.
Yeah. So she described what I was feeling so well by just talking about the fact that society is on this fast moving bullet train heading off a cliff.
Yes.
And so she said there's 3 different carts that are on that train. Some people know that's headed that way and they just want the best of everything. They're just trying to get luxury, all those kinds of things. Then there's people who also don't, they kind of have a sense, but they're just trying to maybe get to the next level up. And there's people who may not even realize that they're on the train. And I might be messing up some of her metaphors, so I apologize. But the main point I would want listeners to hear is her point was, get off the train. Whatever you do, get off the train You'll find the people after you do, but you need to get yourself, your family, your friends off the train. And so one of my students said it best as saying, instead of giving people a ticket onto the train, how about giving people tickets off the train? And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm off the train. I'm finding the rest of the people who've made that decision and reconfiguring what it means to collaborate and work together and really show up as our profession and as people in general.
So for people who aren't ready to ditch the train entirely,
I get that.
what are some small things people could do? Other OTs listening, what are some small things they could do to give themselves a bit of this?
Yeah. I would say one of the things is simply to notice give yourself permission to notice what really lights you up.
Yeah.
And maybe ask other people to be part of that journey with you. Because sometimes the things that we're best at, we don't even see ourselves. It takes somebody else to notice and invite us into that possibility for us to see that. So I would say even setting up a group of people who serve as spotters, essentially, for noticing what your light is. So permission to notice, I guess, would be the number one thing that I would say. And
it amazes me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It amazes me how that reflective piece is mind-blowing for some people. It's one of the differentiating factors in my Activate Vitality Planner is that we're so planning focused and goal-oriented. SMART goals. What am I going to do? How am I going to achieve it? How do I get more productive? There's not enough lines in here. I need more space to jam more things in. And really, I actually get them to reflect for the first 2 weeks. Just notice how the day-to-day occupations, day-to-day activities are impacting them. What lights them up? What brings them down? Where are those moments of flow and energy and exhaustion and resistance and all of that? And just watch for 2 weeks. And people go, I don't want to do that. Let's get on with it. Let's go make the changes. No, you need to actually slow down and observe. And a lot of people won't get started because they're like, they got too much to do. That's a waste of time. No, we got to learn to slow down. And then every 2 weeks in there's a process of looking back and intentionally planning forward and looking back. And if you want to know about where you need to be, that's what your digital calendar is for. But that process of creating awareness
different purpose, right?
Yes, that is hard. It amazes me that that's mind-blowing people.
And what you're saying in that is really what you're describing is very similar to deschooling, right?
Yeah.
Is that it is this process of just notice. That's your job right now. Forget your to-do list, forget your direct path and your 5-year plan, all that kind of thing. The other thing that makes me think about is take a little time to reflect on how did you actually get to the successes you've had in life? Did they happen by your 5-year planner and your very specific goals, or was it different? And if so, in what way? And notice the patterns there, because that I think is what got me through this last few years, is to reflect back on all the things that I had done. Almost all of them started with not what I planned, but being willing to accept what's in front of me and go from there, rather than I had it on my calendar. I said that I was going to do this. These were my goals, making peace with that. And I've had a lot of practice with that, not because I chose it necessarily, but because it chose me in some ways. And I had the choice. Do I accept it as it is? Do I become willing to experiment with that? And I think that reflective practice that you talk about is one of the ways that we can get comfortable with that, is noticing, hey, I guarantee there's proof in there that has worked for you. Just maybe have been so busy trying to meet some expectations that you forgot how it actually works.
Oh, that the process you're describing is so important when it comes to resilience. Like a resilient, flexible individual who can embrace what is present, see the opportunity, detach from their agenda and refocus on, you still want to remain true to yourself, true to your values, those sorts of things. But if we are so attached to a pathway that may or may not be the right pathway, we just couldn't see it when we set out on that pathway.
Right.
And being open to getting around the corner and seeing what's there and taking those next steps and learning and embracing. And I think about it in terms of travel as well, right? That sense of when we go on a trip. We want to experience what's there. I don't travel with a big agenda. We have a general idea of some highlights, but if I go with an agenda, I miss out on the most beautiful things that pop up in front of you. Nope, can't stop and see that festival there. We have a museum to see. It's on the schedule.
Yeah. And yeah, making space for that is so helpful. Just to maybe, even if you can try to say no to some things that you feel like, is this really going to give me enough energy or is it going to deplete me? And giving yourself permission to say no to more of those things. I'm making that a game this December. That has been quite fun to just
How many no's?
Really. Yeah. And how many times do I find myself feeling the pull to say yes to something that I really need to say no to in this moment because it's going to tank my energy. I might love that. I may love the opportunity, but the timing is off. And so it might be a not yet, but that has been surprisingly enjoyable for me. Look, I said no today. And I didn't have to say a whole big long reason to it. I just said, there's lots of neat opportunities to figure out how to have a little bit of this unschooling style life for all of us. Yeah. Like I said, I didn't jump right to it. I would be lying if I told you that was my first route. I actually said very clearly, I will never do that. I need structure. That was my first take on it. But it was through following the road in front of me that I said, oh, I think that's actually where I'm meant to be. I didn't plan on it, but that is what is needed to create this environment. But also staying open to there may come a time where it's not. But I can still, as you said, take a piece of the unschooling stuff with me no matter what. It isn't an all or nothing.
I think at different stages of life, different financial positions, different stages of confidence in your ability to provide outside the box without a lot of structure. A lot of people do require a steady job with a steady income, with steady benefits and that sort of thing. And so not everybody can do it, but what are thinking about what are little ways where we can not just follow the automatic path, not just follow the automatic thought and stop and have a peek around.
Yeah. And I think one of my favorite questions for that, a reflective question, this comes from years and years of noticing that I work really hard to achieve an expected outcome without sometimes noticing, hey, the reason this is so hard is because it's not actually the expectation. It's the rule in my head. So if you come up against something that's really hard and feels like, gosh, who does this? Why would they expect that? Yeah. To just pause and question ourselves, is this a rule or is it a rule in my head? Often it is a rule in my head. That has been very freeing to just view those moments of resistance as a sign to pause and check in. What's really going on here? I would be embarrassed to tell you some answers I've found in that question, but they've been fun. They've been fun as well and life expanding. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a client in an OT in my program who she described exactly noticing that resistance. There was a resistance. I think it was a resentment she described. And she shares this story openly, and I know she's comfortable with it. I won't say who she is, though, but there was this resentment in the evening when she was cleaning the kitchen and nobody cared. And kids are demanding lots of things from her and her husband's just relaxing. And does not anybody not see how much work there is to do? And I remember saying, why is it just you? Like, I'm trying to ask questions like, how did we get here sort of thing? And a lot of it came down to some rules, some kind of associations in her head, right? Where one of them was that sense of it has to be done before I go to bed. You can't go to bed without having a perfectly clean kitchen. That was when it'll just bother me. Okay, who's in control of that? And another was that sense that, it was more relational with her husband and it was about communication and it was about roles and shared responsibilities and her expectation that this is all her. Just because somebody else isn't doing it in that moment doesn't mean she has to do it.
Right.
What happens if you go sit on the couch too?
Yeah, imagine. It's possible, right?
Every evening is just mom racing around the kitchen angry. That's just the pattern, right? So why would anybody do differently?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think paying attention to the timing of things and our expectation on those too has been such a valuable thing for me to think about. Why do we think necessarily that work, school, everything has to happen between 9 and 5 or it's not really work or school?
Yeah.
Why? what happens if you start to deconstruct that and look at different ways? And for example, my kids, sometimes some of their best learning is at about 8 o'clock at night. They've been night owls since they were babies, trying to live in a world where they had to get up early. And so every morning was just tough for them. And so seeing them operate on their own natural circadian rhythms and allow that space to, why am I so worried about getting the learning done by 3 o'clock or something like that? They actually are more ready to take in information and have an in-depth conversation closer to bedtime. That has been something that has been eye-opening for me. I'm making my life and their lives so much harder because of the rules in my head. But it's been freeing.
So many OTs go into business because they want to do it differently. They want to get outside of those artificial schedules, arbitrary regulation, not regulation, we've got regulations, but rules set out by their employer. They're going to do it their way. They're going to practice in a way that OT should be practiced. But then they sometimes have trouble actually stepping outside of and continuing to impose themselves. And I know this is true for me too. So many of us have an unhealthy relationship with productivity. What is productivity? We could have a whole episode about that. But I find my best thinking time is early in the morning. So in my midlife phase of life, I am a very early riser and I love my quiet alone time, and my brain is firing and nobody else needs anything from me. So I can meander down whatever path or rabbit hole inspires me. And sometimes I could do a whole day's worth of work in 2 hours because I'm lit up. But then why don't I stop? Like the other day, I was like, wow, I got the first episode of the podcast uploaded so that Apple could approve it, so that I could launch this in a couple of weeks. This is something that I thought was going to take me all day. And it was 9 a.m. I thought, like I just wanted to rest. No, I still worked until something there was this inner drive that's now you've got time to do other things. So get back to work and sit back down in your office until the kids get home from school. Or until it's supper time.
Yeah.
This. I have the flexibility to stop. I don't actually have appointments all day those days, but I kept on going. There's just this habituation, I think, but you work a full day. You get the most out of every day, and that's productive.
Yeah. And I've heard people say before that one of the ways they circumvent that is as they're trying to learn to be okay with, no, I did that in 2 hours and I can stop in 2 hours, is to schedule other things that are enjoyable, almost needing to say, okay, then I finished this by this time. I'm now going to get 4 hours of rest by going out in nature. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do these things. But sometimes we almost need to schedule ourselves into other components of life because, like you said, there's a rule in our head, like that I'm not being productive or I'm not being an adult, whatever we're telling ourselves about what that means to rest. I think the thing that helps me now is I really work hard I know very well I'm not perfect at it, but I do work hard to continue to bring myself back into alignment and to have my words and actions align. And so by being a homeschooling parent or unschooling parent and having students and being out in the business world working with collective community focused stuff, I feel like if I'm going to say one thing and practice the exact opposite, then no one's going to understand what we do or believe what we do as occupational therapy professionals. So it is almost a part of being true to our profession. And when I think of it in that way, then it invites others to come along with me, because the best way I think for people to learn that is to model it. And so to find the other people who we're imperfectly doing it together, but we're committed to continuing to figure out, how do I come back into alignment? Even when I stray, even when I go off path and pick something up that I really shouldn't, how do I come back? And that I don't need to hide behind a curtain for 3 weeks because I was human. Yeah.
So true. I definitely made that an intentional choice in my brand to make it that I was going to model doing it imperfectly. For 2 reasons. For one, it helped me get out of my head because that was I knew it was going to be helpful for people to see it. And I can't live up to perfect. Who can? And if I think everything has to be perfect, I won't get anything done because it rarely is. But if I can actually make that an asset in my business to help others see that, then okay, then this is going to be okay. It's helpful when I show up imperfectly. It's helpful when I mess up. It's helpful when I can model what we learn from that or how we recover from that.
Yeah. And I think when you start to see, that's, I think, one of the gifts of feeling like I'm starting my own entrepreneurial journey. I've got students at the college level at various degrees, and I've got my own children to see the trajectory of how that works at all stages of life, and to see people pick that up and start to talk to one another. You see people's inner voice change, and you hear it reflected in how they talk to each other. And sometimes you might recognize how you are influencing each other in that it's not always, I don't have to be responsible for that, but that if I hold responsibility for creating an environment that it has the possibility and is more likely to interact that way, then I'm going to see all sorts of great things coming from people that we didn't even realize were there because we were so busy trying to meet some expectations.
You've got such a beautiful vision, and it's very clear what you're connected to, what your values are, what you're passionate about. May I ask, how does that turn into business has to have some income to be sustainable?
Sure.
Are you a nonprofit? Are you?
No, I'm an LC.
Okay.
I am just at the beginning stages of actually charging for services for my work. And part of what I did initially was I see a need to have a conversation at a collective community level, because working in the different arenas that I have, schools, healthcare, just working with law enforcement as part of collaboration and addiction, all these different elements of society, they don't happen in disconnected silos. They all impact each other. If I can't get to work because school has these days off, then that affects it. If the hours of something means that it's hard to pick up my children, there's all these things that are interwoven. And I started recognizing, how we were spending our time just really isn't working. So the first step in that was committing to, I'm just going to start a blog called To a Life Well Occupied, so I can start to therapeutically process what I was witnessing and what I felt like I needed, and to allow people to access some conversations at a time where it worked for them. There was no, you don't have to be here at a certain time. Read, listen at a time that works for you. And so that was kind of my community needs assessment. And from there, what I'm building is the idea that I would take on projects and collaborate and have pop-up kind of events in ways that suit life as it is. So I don't know what the future all holds in terms of what I need to be a homeschooling parent. I'm anchored in that as a responsibility and as a mother. And so I don't want to take on, I'm trying to think of how I would describe this, but in the same way that they say you don't want to replicate school at home, I don't want to replicate business as an entrepreneur. That way, I don't want to replicate that hustle, that feel of I have to constantly be working 40 hours a week or more in order to be enough. Right now, I say for the business, it's how do I notice the invitations and opportunities, and also not limiting myself to being only an entrepreneur. That if I see opportunities where I want to work PRN or I want to do different things, that I can pick up those things. And it doesn't mean I failed as an entrepreneur to do that. It's that I'm working in a way that allows myself to stay in alignment and true to where I'm at in that season. So it's consulting, it's community-based projects, it's just noticing the needs of a community and showing up fully as myself so people can find me. Because if I'm so busy trying to do what I think I've found being online and searching for job applications, just the most frustrating thing. I think I saw maybe 3 jobs that I would actually even want to apply for in a few years, or things that if they were something I'd want, working 40 hours as a homeschooling parent doesn't work real well. You could do it, but it would be putting me over the edge of what I'm capable of doing. And I didn't work this hard to bury myself further. I just got done going through a process of shedding something. So now it's just challenging, my own beliefs on what that looks like, and being willing to do much more project time limited work, I guess is what I would say.
Cool. Really cool. I have so enjoyed hearing about this. I have a couple more questions for you. Actually, before I ask that, was there anything else that we didn't talk about before I ask you those questions that you'd like to share about?
I don't think so. I think we're good.
Okay. Okay. So I ask everybody a couple questions at the end. What does being brave mean to you?
It's a good question because as I was preparing for this, I thought, are you brave? Like, how would you describe yourself as brave? And I think sometimes for me, being brave is trusting yourself and trusting that that inner knowing connected, however somebody wants to phrase that. But I view that as being connected to my spirit, that I know myself well enough that I can trust that. And even when it's in the opposite of what everybody else is doing, and I feel like I'm going in the wrong direction, that me being anchored to that and willing to follow that is brave. And I think it inspires other people to say, oh, it doesn't have to always look exactly like everybody else. That maybe there's a reason she's changing how she's doing things.
You have faith in yourself, your value.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is good. That's really good.
So I think that's what it means for me. Yeah.
Do you hope OTs will get a little bit more brave about the next couple of years?
I believe the medical model is a piece of where we belong, but I don't think that it's necessarily where we fully belong. I think that I see us as being part of more of the preventative wellness end of things in the collective community conversations. And I see us doing a lot more consulting type of work and not necessarily as an OT. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes it's just, I see us being brave enough to say, what if I didn't have to be fully here as an occupational therapist? Where else would I go? And how do I serve in a way that honors me and the people I'm with on a team, as well as the community? So I would love to see us go. In my mind, in 100 years, we're going to be much more community oriented than we are individual focused, because the society needs us to be that way, to be brave about asking, why are we not there yet? What do we need to learn to get there? Yeah.
Unlearn is key. Unlearning. What is something brave you've done recently?
Well, I would say the unschooling stuff felt brave because I moved to a city where I bought the house because it was in the school district that I wanted. I had my whole life planned. Like my kids had friends here. It was really great. And pulling my children out of school, I would say, and saying, okay, we're on a totally different train now. That felt brave because it's definitely not what I planned, not with the flow of what everybody else is doing, but being willing to recognize, but if that's not meant for you, then you don't do it. And if it's not meant for your kid, that has felt particularly brave. And to stay with it, even as things start to go back to a more regular way of being, I guess, with how kids are doing school now in traditional settings, to recognize that if that still doesn't work for us, then that's okay. We can find the ways that do work.
Well, that's wonderful. Really wonderful. If people want to learn a little bit more, connect with you, have some questions, where would you like them to find you?
Sure. People can find me. I'll send my email and contact info and such. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kary Waters. If you have something in mind, particularly that you want to connect about, like, hey, I'd love to do a project, or you're interested in some possibilities, you can find me on my website. It's lifewelloccupied.com or solidagovc.com. Life Well Occupied is easier. They lead to the same place. Yep. Okay. And you can find the blog and just some more about me there.
Wonderful. And I'll put all those links in the show notes.
I have one other thing that I forgot to mention.
Oh, yeah.
Is that another piece that we are doing for the blog is having community kind of conversations. So salons are free events that we do online where we just talk about what's on our mind, about things like OT collaboration and that kind of thing. Facebook is another place. If you look up To a Life Well Occupied there's a page where you can find out what's happening about the latest event.
Okay. Oh, that's really cool. I will definitely check that out myself. And I appreciate you sharing this process and inspiring others who are feeling burdened by the containers that we are feeling stuck in.
Yeah. I hope we can all do this. We're all still here. We just keep figuring it out together, right?
Yeah, and bit by bit. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right?
Right.
It's all or nothing seldom works, but experiment a little bit, explore, get curious about
Exactly.
what's out there. Look out the train window.
Yeah. Or look at it as it goes by. Let that train move on without you if you decide you want to chop off. But there's other of us out here as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, was that a juicy conversation or what? Make sure you go find Kary in all of those places. And if you'd like to connect with me and join my community of occupational therapists where we support each other in unhustling and finding our way, you can find me on Facebook. I'm Carlin OT Coach, or on Instagram at BalanceWorksOT. Let's connect.